So as I looked at the different topics today, I found that we had what is personally my favorite topic, and that is readiness and our workforce, our IT cyber workforce. The Army is all about the people, our soldiers and civilians who every day um, work hard to defend our freedoms and do it so committed and professionally as they do that. So we're now facing a time of having to have a new workforce called cyber and the individuals. And I went back and kind of looked at the Special Operations Forces. That was probably the last group that we introduced as a new capability that took new skill sets, if you will. And it took them almost 10 years to get fully operational to FOC in the Special Operations world. Unfortunately today, building the cyber force, we don't have that luxury. We're being shot at every day. We're defending our missions and our people daily on that. So we don't have that luxury. So this panel is extremely important in that discussion, how we're going to get there. When you talk about the skill sets that is so critical for cyber operations, for network operations, as we go through that, what we're finding on the industry side is, because you have all these great certifications, Security Plus, ethical hacker training, and those certifications, does not equal to aptitude to be able to operate in this nebulous environment called cyber. And so we spend a lot of money. We have a psychologist on our staff to ensure that when we interview people to come into this critical job, that they in fact have the aptitude. Because if they have the aptitude, they can be trained. If they can study and pass tests and get certification, does not mean that they can operate in the cyber environment. And it's very important, and I was talking recently to a four-star commander, and he says, we're hiring the wrong people. Their resumes were right. They had all the right words, but when you get them on the job, they don't have that particular skill set. So it's very important. So that I appreciate this distinguished panel that AUSA has put together to address just that challenge. Our panel chair today is Mr. Carl Schneider. Sir, it's great to see you again. I had the privilege to work with in the Pentagon. Mr. Schneider is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Tough job. In this position, he's had oversight of all the planning, analysis, and assessment of requirements when it comes to our personnel. He serves as Principal Advisor on total force, manpower, and personnel policy. And recently, he served as the Acting Secretary during some very difficult times as we were introducing the new cyber force as we went through that. Prior to his appointment, he served also as the Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff G1, managing our Army officers, soldiers, and civilians and personnel plans and programs, a top priority to articulate, and he has the right background to discuss the balance of the cyber workforce with the total force. Next to him is Ron Pontius, a fellow battle mate of mine, is currently the Deputy to the Commanding General, U.S. Army Cyber Command and 2nd Army. And in this capacity, he manages and provides the strategic assessment direction across all Army Cyber Command and 2nd Army operations, to include the planning, coordinating, integrating, synchronizing, and supervising the organization efforts to conduct the full spectrum of cyber operations in the DoDN. He also serves as a senior advisor, providing the authoritative expert advice on all aspects of cyber operations, force structure, and organizational concepts, and clearly understands the right mix that is needed today in the cyber force. We spoke of Major General Steve Fogarty this morning, and of all the great things that he is doing as the Commanding General of U.S. Army's Cyber Center of Excellence and Fort Gordon. And his background experience is unparalleled with anybody else's in this environment. And we all are absolutely proud of what he has done in moving this effort forward at Fort Gordon, and it will be the premier cyber command across the joint environment. He served as the Director of Joint Intelligence Operation in Afghanistan, Director of Intelligence J2 in the United States Central Command, General Fogarty returned to Afghanistan for a third time to serve as the Deputy Chief of Staff Intelligence, CJ2, for the NATO's International Security Assistance Force. And prior to that, General Fogarty commanded the U.S. Army Intelligence Security Command, so well qualified there. Our next individual has been a great partner to the government in many assignments. Mr. Anthony Robbins is the Vice President at the Department of Defense segment of AT&T and responsible for delivering the integrated solutions that drive innovation and modernizing networks, providing advanced cyber capabilities to help mobilize the warfighter. His highly skilled staff designs and deploys the global information technology solutions that improve efficiencies and end-user experience while executing their missions. Prior to joining AT&T, Anthony was the Vice President of Federal at Brocade, where he led sales, engineering, and the partner ecosystem that supported defense, civilian, and intelligence agencies, as well as systems integration. And our cleanup batter, a great friend of mine, General Chris Kemp, is the commanding general of the 335th Signal Command Theater, and also appointed as the G6 of United States Army Central 3rd U.S. Army in Arif Jan, Kuwait, where he also served a tour over there as our CIO G6. General Kemp has served in multiple tours supporting OIF, OEF, Operation New Dawn, and he has commanded at all levels. Chris represents how the total force works successfully today, how we have brought together the reserve component and the active component into one team, and has been such a tremendous teammate of ours. In his civilian occupation, General Kemp serves as a senior program manager for Hewlett-Packard. And so with that, I will turn this over to our panel chair.
Susan, thank you so much for doing this for us, and glad you got my title right. I have one of the longest titles in the federal government, which means I'm one of the least important people in the federal government. But we do have a great lineup today, and the way I propose to go through this is, I think it would be worthwhile starting at the operational level with Ron, and then going to General Fogarty to talk a little bit more about the doctrinal work that's going on and what's going on with military personnel down at the COE. Then go to Mr. Robbins and get the view from the private sector and see what we can learn from that. And then General Kemp talk about the reserve component piece, and then I'll wrap up at the end talking about some late-breaking things that are happening within the Defense Department or within the federal government, particularly as it relates to civilian cyber warriors. So let me, Ron, start with you.
As I want to kind of focus on three things. First, set the operational context as Carl talked about, then bring it down to kind of talk about the organization team structure that is this cyber, that's composed of the cyber workforce, and then go on down and set the stage a bit more about down at the individual soldier and civilian level. And I'll focus particularly on the civilians, and then General Fogarty will take it from there on the military side. You've heard a couple times today, we started this morning with the Joint Information Environment and how the Army is really all in about really embracing moving to this single global network, and what does that really mean. That's one aspect. You've also heard things that said this is an operational environment. And I'd like to really make that a strong statement. The Army is really embracing that the DoDIN, the Department of Defense Information Network, which composes of our networks, our data, and our systems. Notice it's more than networks. We have gone way beyond that about the criticality of what it means of providing information, decision, execution to the operational force. It is about the DoDIN, networks, data, and systems. And what that really means, that is our operational environment. We can't just treat it as an IT environment. We truly must treat it as an operational environment. What that also means is it really is a combined arms environment. It isn't about, well, it's a signal guy or a cyber guy or an intel guy. This is about how we really truly work together to build, operate, defend, and fight with the DoDIN as our operational environment. And that's an absolutely key aspect of what the Army is really embracing. But it's also more than just, again, signal intel and cyber. It's fires, it's planners, And in many ways, and the Army has making tremendous progress on establishing and evolving the force. But as the previous Chief General Odierno told General Cardone 2 years ago, we're all in on what we're doing in the larger enterprise and in the larger joint, but also what are you doing for the Army? And so there's a variety of experiments, Army Cyber Command, FORSCOM, TRADOC, that we are working together at the originally Joint Readiness Training Center, and now the National Training Center, and the next rotation coming up, 16-8 with 1-1 Brigade Combat Team. It's about how do we truly integrate cyberspace operations into unified land operations. It's not about doing cyber unto itself. How do you really integrate it? And what you're going to see with this upcoming rotation, it's more than just integrating cyber. How do we integrate signal, cyber, intel, information operations, electronic warfare to deliver operational effects in support of the operational commander? And that's what this mission space is about. You've heard of the great work that's going on with building the cyber mission force. The Army is leading in this space. What you heard on the active side, 41 teams. The requirement is to have all of them at initial operational capability by the end of this fiscal year. I believe the Army will make that cut first and have them all full operational capable by the end of FY18. We're definitely on track with that. Great support with the Army of what's happening. But the Army is also going to build, as you heard in some of the others, 21 reserve component, 11 in the National Guard and 10 in the reserve. And we're working right now processes to really understand how we're going to use the reserve component forces, but also work to make them officially as part of the cyber mission force, so they have priority on training and those sort of things. But it's more than the cyber mission force. It's also, again, the DODN. What we're doing with evolving and bringing together the C2 structure of NETCOM and the theater signal commands and the enterprise and the signal brigades, about how we're really organized to deliver the capability in that single global effort of DODN being our operational environment. And additionally, with this organizationally, the Army has also been designated to be the lead for the Department of Defense to build a persistent training environment for our cyber mission forces to do individual training, collective training, and mission rehearsal. And so we have the lead, and resources will start flowing to the Army in FY17. When you bring it on down to now the workforce level, this really is about how do we do the right human resources strategy of this combined military and civilian team. On our cyber mission force, it's a mixture of about 8% military, 20% civilian. But then again, it's the larger signal and intel force, the fires guys, et cetera. How do we really do? How do we really identify what is the way in which we identify talent, grow that talent? As Susan talked about, this is absolutely a competition for talent out there. And so how are we growing it? How are we managing that? And truly going beyond an HRC view of talent management. What's the real attributes that we need to recruit the right men and women, bringing them in, enlisted, warrant, officer, civilian? How do we grow, train them, manage them, grow the future brigade commander of a cyber brigade or of a NETCOM? How do we grow the command sergeant major? And so that is what we're really working on in many ways. The Army is also leading with the creation of the military branch, Career Field 17 with cyber. General Fogarty will talk more about that. On the civilian side, we're also working closely with the DoD on how do we do an equivalent of that on the civilian workforce. And again, really a pleasure to be here as part of this panel. Really appreciate all the great work, support from AUSA, General Swan. And so on to General Fogarty.
Hey, Ron, thanks for setting that. There we go. Thanks for setting that up. So at Fort Gordon, I really lead a coalition of the willing. In this case, it's signal, it's electronic warfare, and cyber. And I say willing because that's what it is most of the time, but sometimes they're not as willing. And so as we start to look at the big idea, it's exactly what Ron described, which is DODN operations. So the most important, most complex operation that DoD conducts is DODN, because it's the foundation for everything else we do. So if you want precision fires, you want effective mission command, you want joint ISR, you want telemedicine, you want joint logistics, then you better pay attention to DODN operations. And so our big idea is that it's a weapons platform. So I don't have artillery, I don't have attack helicopters. I don't have armored vehicles. I don't have infantry down at Fort Gordon. But I think what I do have, Fort Gordon at large, is the Army's most important power projection platform. And so as my peers and some of the other centers have kind of teased me on that, they said, well, Steve, you don't have a rail yard, you don't have an airfield. So how can that be a power projection platform? I said, the power we're projecting is information. It's information dominance. And so we don't put special operations on the field. We don't send F-16s into a target. We don't have ships cruising the Med without information dominance. If we do, then we're accepting probably unacceptable risk at that point. So when you start to talk to your workforce now, that they're not just providing a service, they're actually fighting a weapon. In this case, that weapon is the network. That changes the calculus. And when you try to convince them that they're operators instead of just supporters or enablers, that's actually a pretty interesting discussion. So that's what we think we have to do. It's not just for that force. Everyone has to look at it in this way. That if you're going to set the theater, you're going to set the operation, then what that means is that you've actually set Doden operations for everything else you need. And over the last 15 years, what I've told most senior audiences is that this nation has deployed the most capable communications that it's ever taken to war. And I'll tell you, I don't get any pushback on that. But we deployed it for access, for affordability, for speed of deployment, for capacity, and what we accepted risk in was resiliency and security. And so as we start to look at this, what you see is that natural drift of the integration of a bunch of stovepipes. In this case, intel, cyber, signal, electronic warfare, information operations, and fires. And if you're missing any of those components, then you're accepting a tremendous risk on behalf of your commander. And so what is a workforce that looks like that has to do that? Well, first of all, they're very different than, frankly, the current workforce. They have to be almost special operators because they have to understand not just their tactical tasks, but how important it is into the whole of the operation. So I'm going to talk two things very quickly. One is cyber and electronic warfare, and I don't use those interchangeably, and I'll explain why, and then signal. And we're doing this in parallel. So when we made the decision 2 years ago to stand up the branch, it's actually a very small branch. It's only about 1,300 actual cyber operators. And the Army made a strategic decision that we would not create an MOS for the offense and an MOS for the defense. And we're the only service that did that. And we think that is actually the right call because both inform the other. Now, most of the defenders come from the signal side. Most of the guys on the offense come from the intel side. But as we actually transition to the branch, that will change, and it will change almost overnight. So we've started out with very high-quality officers. We actually just graduated our first bullet course. Those officers are already out in the field as we sit here. We learned a lot from that experience, and we'll have our next class that will start in August. Our warrant officers are actually on board now. We've run 2 transition courses. We'll run 2 more this year, and we'll go up to probably about 4 in FY17. And then we're going to start the actual warrant, the basic officer course in October, and then the advanced officer course shortly after that. And then on the enlisted side, we continue to train our cyber soldiers, but they're trained principally at Pensacola and within the NSA ADET system. Starting in February of 17, we'll actually run our first course for our enlisted soldiers at Fort Gordon. And frankly, my limitation right now, if you think about what you need to run a school, you have to have students. We have quality students, people who want to contribute to the force. I have to have faculty. We have great faculty. And it will be a mix of military, contractors, and civilians. And so we have top-notch faculty. I have to have curriculum. And so we've worked that with NSA. We've worked that with a bunch of different mission partners, including the Army National Guard, who's actually helped us get it from kind of the ADET format into the Army University model. So that's been a very important relationship when we talk about total Army. And then the last thing I need are facilities. So my pacing item right now is SCIFs. So we have lots of SCIF space, but it's all operational SCIF space in Fort Gordon. And so we're addressing that right now with some temporary facilities as we look toward an almost $900 million investment the Army's going to make just on the Cyber Center of Excellence to get us the facilities we need to create that world-class learning environment. So what I'll tell you, I think we're on a good path, but we still have a long ways to go. Next action, the 29 force, about 1,000 strong today. It'll drop to about 900 by the time some of the reductions have taken place. We've looked at this very hard, and what we're going to do is we're going to bring in the electronic warfare force into cyber. It'll be a different MOS, but they're going to be linked inextricably to cyber. And that's the force that will provide EW and cyber planners at BCT division corps level. It will provide the actual operators for offensive electronic attack capabilities, but we do not want them, and we don't want people to believe that this is something that's outside. I think you realize that as we've drawn that framework for cyberspace operations, we actually call it SEMA. We've brought in not only offense, defense, and DOD and ops, but we're the only service that actually added EW into the mix. And the last thing I want to talk about, which is very important because they're the majority of the actual cyber workforce when you really think about it, it's our Signal Corps. They're the ones that are doing DOD and operations. And so I'll train about 14,000 soldiers at Fort Gordon this year. About 13,000 of them are going to be hardcore signal officers, warrant officers, and soldiers. And so one of the things we have taken a very hard look at are the 19 separate MOSs that form the Signal Corps. We're actually converging some of those MOSs. We'll reduce it down to 14. But very importantly, on the IT side, is we've actually gone from 2 MOSs to 3 MOSs, which will give us defense. It'll give us the network management. And then what we've added are data managers, knowledge managers that we think are so important as we look ahead to the future. So a lot of great things happening down there. Invite you down TechNet on 4 August, or actually 2 through 4 August, and you have a chance to see the partnership of government, industry, academia, and what's really making Fort Gordon a hub for cyber operations for the Army. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And clearly a lot of progress. I wanted to start off with, didn't I hear somebody challenging a Ford Pinto on the last panel? When I headed off to college in 1978, that was my car of choice. So I started off today a little bit offended by those comments. But sir, you know, as I was just trying to think about my perspective, which is going to be a little bit different than the perspectives that some of you all have, given your experience and your current service to this great nation. I just made a statement that I actually just wanted to read, and the statement is that I believe that modernization of the network and tooling of this network to serve the U.S. Army and the Department of Defense to exploit it will be the weapon of choice for generations of warfighters to come. And that is that perspective that I would like to represent as an employee of AT&T. However, more importantly, as an employee of the industry head, I've served this marketplace for the past 30 years. So let me start with kind of the scope of the problem or the opportunity space before I get into the people. And so the Internet of Things is currently on everybody's cell phone right now. It's on your website. Your kids are asking you about it. They're shopping at Dick's Sporting Goods and going home and looking up reviews and thinking about chips and shoes and your Fitbits and the like. It's very real, and it's going to offer us amazing challenge and complexity when we think about serving, whether it's green suitors or war fighters in general, of our future. There's a couple things that are happening, and I'm not going to take this into some technology track for sure to lose this audience at this hour. But you all know very well Moore's Law. And so Moore's Law was driving the computing baseline that drove all the enterprise applications that we all have deployed for the U.S. Army or our nation's military. And there's a couple of things that have happened to Moore's Law. First of all, networking has hit networking. So networking is now keeping pace with Moore's Law. It's one important piece. The other piece about Moore's Law that is really important is that the transistors that you could get on a chip, you could get twice as many transistors on a chip, about every 2 years. Some people said a year and a half. And so these chips were getting twice as fast every 2 years. Okay? The dynamic that has occurred in the marketplace that's just really important to understand is not only is that still happening, but the chips are dropping in price at 50% every 2 years, right? So the path that we're on is that the economic impact of this cannot be understated. And so not only do you have the massive performance improvement every 2 years, you have just the massive cost decrease. And so if we think about, our U.S. Army or our military, anything that you want to put on the network, anything, a piece of paper, a pen, anything that you might want to put on the network is going to be available to be considered to be put on the network. Some people talk about a programming model of we'll be able to program the world, right? I mean, so there's some very big things that are happening. Now, today on AT&T's network, for context or contrast, right, we have tens of millions of devices on our network today. In the last 7 years, as we have found ourselves in this 4G space, right, we have seen 150,000% increase in AT&T's network. Now, if I pull back from my role at AT&T and just tell you, as a representative of industry, you'll see that to be the same with other service providers. So you're seeing networking data crossing the network at a rate at which we have never seen, and it's only going to do one thing going forward. It's going to accelerate like we have never seen before. Okay, so as we go from 4G to 5G, so tens of millions of devices on today's network. Dozens of studies project 52 billion devices on the world's network by the year 2020, right? Billions of devices. So if you think about that, from a AT&T network perspective, there's 117 petabytes crossing our network on a daily basis today. Bringing all the other service providers, and then take the millions of devices and go to billions of devices, bringing everyone's imagination, and you can imagine we are heading quickly to a very complex environment, which is why you would spend, the billions of dollars and put 1,000 people to kind of go address this cyber thing. The way in which we view cyber today is based on what we know that's been in front of us. The cyber problem is going to get worse significantly, and it's going to happen faster because the amount of data and the amount of devices that are going to have access to the network are going to grow exponentially. So the size of the problem we have is substantial. And then if I pull back as an industry representative, over this 6 or 7 year period where we've seen this dramatic network explosion, you have also seen the networking industry, largely driving in the U.S., has spent $500 billion on network modernization, research and development, and engineering. And so I think one of the challenges for us is to figure out how do we in industry bring to the Department of Defense and the Army and others, how do we bring this massive investment relative to network infrastructure and modernization to support our warfighters going forward? An important piece that's driving this investment for AT&T and many others is software-defined networking and network function virtualization. It's one of the most transformative things to happen, besides the fact that chips are surpassing what was commonly referred to as Moore's Law. So we have software-defined networking and network functions virtualization combined with what's happening with Moore's Law. We have massive investment, we have next-generation technologies, and so you have a great opportunity for us to figure out how networking serves this community. So then now, how do I relate that to the readiness of the U.S. Army? It's a challenge. I think there's a lot of things about it that are very well understood. Another challenge that we have is because Silicon Valley is hot right now, so is Boston and Austin and wherever else they develop technology in the U.S. and around the world, right? Just recently, Mark Andreessen, who helped bring us some advanced internet technologies, released his fifth fund and raised $1 billion. There's a lot of money going into Boston and Austin and Silicon Valley, and what they're investing in, right? Cloud, mobile, Internet of Things, and cybersecurity. So then our challenge is, how do we invest in our people, our cyber warriors of tomorrow, whether it's train them, retain them, and inspire them to stay with us, or bring them in. So how do we do that? Certainly STEM, trade schools, advanced degrees are important. AT&T is working with Udacity and Georgia Tech, as is the Army. So there's nano degrees, there's a whole bunch of agile things that are out there that are available to us. But there's three things that come to mind. Is one, we got to figure out how to better partner with industry on a training curriculum. And it's really important to figure out how to do that, because there's going to be a class of talent that we might not be able to get to from a U.S. Army or from a Department of Defense standpoint. And it's a national issue. Right, I think we need to drive the agenda as a national issue, and not all of us like to spend a whole bunch of time on Capitol Hill. I think we're all going to have to do that a little bit more to drive this as a national issue. And then, if I come back then to the industry, I will close with a couple of comments. Is that the whole RDT&E community that have served the research and development and engineering space for the future of the Department of Defense and our nation's warfighters have over time, we've put people on the moon. We've done amazing things, for this nation through the U.S. federal government. There's more R&D and engineering being spent today than ever before by industry partners. And so even from an AT&T perspective, I can tell you we've opened up 7 labs, of late. Intel Corporation has spent a tremendous amount, like billions of dollars in fabrications. I think we've got to find a way to bring industry and our warfighters closer. And I think we have to challenge ourselves to do that differently than the track that we're on now. We have to do the track that we're on now, but I think we have to bring into some very new thinking to do some things that are very different, to prepare ourselves for a future that's going to be very different, and it's going to be very soon. So thank you.
Good afternoon, General Swan. Really appreciate you hosting this event. Lieutenant General Farrell, appreciate the invite. For those of you that have not met me, my name is Chris Kemp. I command the 335th Signal Command in East Point, Georgia, which is a small town in Atlanta. I'm going to get probably a little more tactically focused, because that's really where my mainstay at is with the soldiers. Our particular Signal Command is, if you're familiar with those that are across the Army, it's a little different. We have the traditional signal brigades and signal battalions, but within that we have some other organizations, one being a JEC, or Joint Enabling Capabilities Command, which provides JTF capability for combatant commanders. We have soldiers that are on a 72-hour response time, a team that's prepared to go out the door literally on a moment's notice. Additionally, we have a Joint Communications Squadron down at MacDill Air Base, providing direct support to the CENTCOM commander, and then we have a combat camera company that literally moves about the world in direct support of our warfighters on the battlefield. About 20 months ago, the Chief of the Army Reserve made the decision that all things cyber within the Army Reserve would be tucked underneath the 335th. At that point in time, I had no idea what the myriad of things were that we had out there or that we were moving towards. But some of those capabilities, we have what we refer to as Army Reserve elements, which are Army Reserve personnel that work in direct support of specific organizations. So at U.S. Cyber Command, we have an Army Reserve element. Those personnel do everything from work the jock floor to help write policy, to just meet other requirements a Cyber Command commander may have. We have a ARE, Army Reserve element at DISA, 95 personnel that do principally defense of the network. They work for Colonel Paul Kraft, who is out in St. Louis at this time. We have a person on the 1st Information Operations Command. They're fully integrated with that team, have been for a number of years. This next year, we will establish what we refer to as our cyber training element, CTE. A portion of those personnel will go work at West Point, specifically focused on cyber innovation. The balance will work at the Army Reserve training platforms, providing OPFOR type capability. When I think about key readiness challenges, ours are probably fall into big buckets. One of those is length of time for training required. And then the second area would just simply be capacity, which Major General Fogarty has already mentioned. With that said, sir, your team has been a tremendous help. This year alone, they have provided us 84 additional seats for training of our cyber soldiers. And those were unprogrammed slots, but through coordination with your staff and their work, they're helping facilitate that effort. That's important because our largest cyber element is our Army Reserve Cyber Operations Group, which has 10 CPTs within that Mr. Pontius referred to earlier. Our process is to get them through the required training and then allow them a year to do squad methodology training, and at that point in time then be prepared to conduct operations as required. That would be on the individual training side. On the sustainment training side, we partner with a number of people. We've been partnering for a number of years, but in, I'd say, real earnest over the last 3 years. About a half a dozen events a year. Everything from working with AMC Amerdeck down at Redstone Arsenal, a lot of opportunities to work with the National Guard Bureau, and then there's broader events that pull together all components, providing our soldiers those sustainment opportunities. Those AREs that I referred to are doing continuous sustainment training as a support their respective organizations. On collective training, there's large collective training events. We just finished up the Cyber X Games, which walked right into Cyber Endeavor. I had an opportunity to go out there, spend a little time with that group. Cyber Endeavor is actually done at the Naval Postgraduate School, and it is a mix of military, civilian, and private sector, academia, all come together, probably about 250, 300 personnel. A great opportunity for us. I would share with you, all this is reliant on this persistent training environment. There's a need to ensure that it's reserve component friendly. No secret, we do a fair amount of our training on the weekend time frame, and having access, ready access to those environments is critical for us. Additionally, some type of unclass persistent training platform. Much of the work we do in the Army, particularly the Army Guard does, is with government agencies within their states where they have a very clear need for the ability to operate in an unclass vice a classified environment. One of the things that we have done to facilitate moving the training forward in coordination with the Cyber Center of Excellence is leveraging those capabilities that our soldiers bring to the fight. A large number of them work in the private sector in a variety of industries. Most of them, I won't say most, but a large number also have those horizontal skill sets that are required to meet that joint standard, but they also have very critical vertical skill sets that can be brought to bear based on what the mission set is for our nation. We've worked with the Cyber Center of Excellence to get what we refer to as constructive credit. That's an ongoing process, but we're certainly making good headway with that, much like we did in the Functional Area 53 and 24 arena many years ago. I would share this is what I consider the first time in my career I've seen full end-to-end coordination and cooperation. I think it's a great news story. I'm talking from U.S. Cyber Command through the Department of Army, Army Cyber, I mean, pick an organization, down to the cyber protection brigades that do this work daily on behalf of the Army. The relationship, in my mind, is exceptional. And it's the one area where I can say over the 20 months, I don't believe 30 days has gone by, and I can't look back and say we accomplished something positive. It may shock you, sometimes we don't do that in the military. Sometimes you work on something long-term and we don't see those results. But this particular area, as far as the Army Reserve is concerned, there's been consistent progress, and I think that is in great part due to great relationships with the multiple stakeholders at all levels of both the joint side and the Army side. Thank you.
Well, thanks to everybody on the panel for what you said. I'll wrap up here with some discussion of what's going on in the civilian part of the cyber workforce and some late-breaking things that have come out in the last few weeks that show where both the Department of Defense and the federal government are headed in this area. First of all, you should know that Congress is very much invested in developing the cyber workforce. It has, over the last several years, passed some statutes to sort of poke OSD into doing more and being more active in developing a cyber workforce. It actually gave DoD the authority to have a civilian workforce in cyber under Title 10, which would mean accepted service. There are a lot of things about being in accepted service. It's easier to hire people, it's easier to pay people, and it's easier to get rid of the people who aren't working out. So it is a much more flexible system if we can do it. But what Congress required was for OSD to come up with a plan. And on the 24th of June, it transmitted to the Hill its plan for the cyber workforce. And I'll quickly go over what's in this plan. First of all, it's going to require everybody to identify exactly who is in the cyber workforce, who will be brought into the Title 10 cyber workforce. The Army actually started this work back in December. It finished it a couple of weeks ago. We've gone through and coded our positions, so we think we have a pretty good idea of who's going to be in this new program. Secondly, it's going to be a phased approach. They're going to start with a small number of people in the headquarters and then expand it out. It's going to set up a governance process. There will be a cyber workforce management board that will have decision-making authority on how to run this workforce. It'll be with representation from various entities within the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Personnel and Readiness, the Principal Cyber Advisor, the PCA, the CIO, and I think policy, as well as the others, all the services will be represented on this board. For policies, they're looking towards the existing DCIPS program with the Defense Civilian Intelligence Personnel System, which is another system under Title 10. The intelligence community has done really a good job of managing their people outside of the normal Title V process. They particularly are interested in us looking at NSA and the way they manage a technological workforce. So that's something that they really want to do. At the same time, because it's going to take a while to field this new accepted service for the cyber workforce, they want us to be more aggressive in using those authorities we already have under Title V. And this is an area where I think all of us on the personnel side of the business haven't done as good a job of actually using the authorities we already have. And those authorities include direct hire of people. It has to do with setting salaries, what's known as advanced hire, where you can increase the step. You don't have to come in at step one. And there are other incentives like student loan repayments that we do have the authority to do. Another thing we do is Homeland Security has also been given similar authority, and we need to take a look at what they're doing. On compensation for civilians in this new workforce, again, they're going to look to Title V, they're going to look to DCIPS, and particularly they're going to look to NSA, where NSA has really used some flexibility in pay setting, in supplemental pay to attract cyber and STEM people. So that's what's happening at the DoD level. Across the government, there is a new memorandum that was put out on 12 July. It's signed by the Director of OMB, by the Acting Director of OPM, and by the Federal CIO. It's entitled Federal Cybersecurity Workforce Strategy. And it has 4 imperatives in it. Number one, as we already talked about, is Identify the cybersecurity workforce needs. What do we need? Do we really have a good picture of what we need? As Ron said, our cyber has been working very hard to really come up with a human capital plan to describe the sort of people we need. Secondly, to expand the cybersecurity workforce via education and training. As General Fogarty said, we already have people in Signal and MI who have some of the skills we need. Can't we just take them and further develop them and make them into cyber professionals? That way you don't have to necessarily start all at once from scratch. Clearly, recruiting and hiring highly skilled talent. One of the things we do on the civilian side is our recruiting strategy, as Lieutenant General Mike Rochelle used to tell me, is we got the y'all comes theory of hiring. We post an announcement on USA Jobs and we wait and see who comes. Well, as I know Mr. Robinson tells you, you can't get quality to come work for you by sitting back and waiting. You have to go out and find them. What we don't have in the civilian side is we don't have professional recruiters. We don't have people who go out to work fairs, to go to engineering schools, to go to cyber departments at colleges and universities and say, what's it going to take to get you to sign up for the United States Army? I can give you salary. I can give you, the most important thing, I can give you fun stuff to do. I mean, I think that's what really attracts people is especially younger people, is I want to do cool stuff. If you tell me I can do cool stuff, I'm all yours. The money, okay, that's important. The benefits, yeah, they're important. But I want to do cool stuff. And we have to have people who know how to do that. We don't have people right now on the civilian side. We have 10,000 recruiters on the military side to recruit about 100,000, 120,000 soldiers a year, all components. We have 0 full-time recruiters really on the civilian side to hire about between 16 and 20,000 people a year. I don't need 10,000, but boy, I could probably use 50 or 100. So that we have a deliberate process to go out and get the talent that Ron has identified as the sort of people we need for the cyber workforce. And then, of course, as we talked about, retaining and developing that talent. It's not enough to just bring them in. What are we going to do to keep them interested? What are we going to do to keep developing their skills in an area where things are changing every single day? The skills that were good enough yesterday are probably not going to be good enough tomorrow. So what do we need to do to keep sharpening the sword to make sure that we continue to have the people with the knowledge and skills and experience to get the job done? And I'll close with this thought. General Fogarty and I were talking about it before this afternoon, and I liken this to the Manhattan Project, right? We're just at the very beginning of understanding what's going on here. It's changing every single day. And what it took was, really 2 people were key. If you go back and read the history, it was Robert Oppenheimer, who understood the science and how to bring together a bunch of really difficult people and get them to work towards a common goal. Right? He was the one who was able to do that. And then an Army general officer made it work. He was the one who understood, we got a mission, we got to get it done, let's get going. So where are we going to find those people? Where are we going to find those people to lead this effort? Because it's going to be a national effort for us to get at this, that is changing every day, that's still at the early, we're where the United States was probably in 1940, right? Where they say, hey, we know we need to pay attention to this, but we're not really sure what it's going to look like. And that's where we got to do, and we got to be like General Groves, we got to be like Dr. Oppenheimer, and really think about how we're going to lead our way through this, because we're going to need to do it if we're going to be successful. So, Susan, I guess we're ready for questions.
Yes. Thank you. Those were all great comments, very pointed in where our challenges are. So let's talk some solutions here. The first one will go to General Fogarty and General Camp. General Grass recently testified in Congress that there is a cyber training backlog for the National Guard. Cyber mission forces past 2018. Does the Army have the right requirements and demand, and do you have the resources for to do the training required to get to where we need to be?
So I think that actually is the $1 million question, and so it goes back to the partnership with industry, particularly in the near term. So I think a lot of people, as we've looked at the reserve component workforce, as we're trying to do equivalency, that's not 50%, it's not 20%, it's probably 5% or even less. So a lot of the requirement on the reserve component is the exact same we have on the active component.
Right.
Is you're going to bring in someone who decides they want to be a cyber warrior, and you start from scratch. One of the challenges we find, if you look at the training path for an interactive online operator, that's 2 years to become an apprentice, to get certified, to get on the network under very intense supervision. And if you're going to do 2 years in a training pipeline, then you're no longer a reserve component soldier, you're really an active component soldier. So that's one of the things we're actually working with both the Guard and the reserves is how do we break it up in a way that makes sense?
Right.
How do you partner with local universities so they can get credit? And then we bring them in for concentrated periods of time to get them the things they need to actually get that accreditation, basically their license to drive on the network. We're actually working right now, and I can't say the organization, but we're looking at a pilot, not just for cyber but IT, with a organization we think can provide a product, very high quality product, much faster than our current model. And we've seen the Navy actually go through a pilot with that. We've been down there to talk to them. And so we're working our way through that to get after that exact question.
Thank you. General Ken?
Yes, ma'am. Just a couple additional thoughts on the equivalency piece. I absolutely agree. There's a very small percentage that could get constructive credit for that whole set of horizontal requirements. But there is an opportunity for them to get partial credit. So there's pieces of that puzzle they could do and then come in and enter the formal schooling where they're short. Additionally, in cooperation with the National Guard Bureau, their Professional Education Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, they've worked hand in glove with Major General Fogarty's team to provide complimentary training there also, which increases the available capacity. I would also share with you that we've been fortunate through the Department of Army and actually through Congress, who provided us some separate funding. And we're leveraging that money to do part of what Major General Fogarty just talked about. Is we do have some soldiers that we can bring on active duty long term to just come in and do the training, step back out, go to a CPT, and then be able to help facilitate training and operations once they return. So we've been, I think, my belief is, at least from an Army Reserve perspective, can't speak for the Army Guard, I personally want a pretty good glide path. I think considering that we have not been presented to the Cyber Mission Force, which obviously drives resourcing, I think the Department of Army has put us in a very good position, along with Congress and along with the work we've been able to do with the Cyber Center of Excellence, and pass to Mr. Pontius.
Yeah, and I just want to make one more comment. Throughout all this, with the Cyber Mission Force, it's really important to recognize all services are training to a common joint standard. And so that is a really good foundational piece here, because in the cyberspace effects with defensive and offensive, it is inherently a joint environment. And whether it's active or reserve, we're all training to the exact same standard. And then just put it in context, the active component build priority of training pipeline was FY 13 to 16, and we're working with Cyber Command to hope to get priority for reserve components 17 to 19, and that's what we're working on. But again, a common joint standard.
Very good. Did you want to add anything, Anthony?
Yeah, I was going to comment. You know, if you think back to the days of DARPA and or NASA's mission and a lot of other things, we used to have this amazing connectedness to the technology companies that drove the infrastructure of today. And at some point, the investing in technology to serve the federal government wasn't as big an opportunity as the shareholder value that was available through the commercial space. So then what you found is the industrial base started designing for the commercial space and trying to figure out how to serve the Department of Defense or the U.S. Army. And then systems integrators played some role to make it fit. I think in the case of cyber, it's worth going and taking a look at how do we connect to the industrial base that's driving this problem in the commercial space, because it's all the same. If you're in Wall Street in the financial services business, they are so concerned about cyber, right? So it's all the same. And there's more money today in the commercial space, and there's more jobs available today that pay a lot of money than they'll ever fill, frankly, right? And so I think it would be a really interesting exercise to try to figure out how do we bring the Department of Defense together on the cyber issue with the industrial base that will go serve this community and do something that's in addition to what these gentlemen are doing today. A lot of leadership is being provided, but something that's perhaps different and unique.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Anthony. Mr. Snyder? My last two hires in the cyber area took 13 months and 11 months. I lost the top candidate for the first because it took too long. How can we compete for the best when our HR process is so painfully slow and complex?
You know, I will never be lonely as long as I'm responsible for civilian hire, because everybody has something they like to talk about on civilian hire. So here's the problem. We hired about 18,000 people, civilians, into the Army last year. In order to do that, we had to review 2.5 million applications, because the law requires us to do it. And under USA Jobs, when somebody says, I'm interested in this job, all they have to do is click a button. Or I'm interested in every job in this series, or every job in this area. They just have to hit a button, and we have to physically look at that application. We can't stop when we've gone through the first 10 and say, hey, I found the person I want to hire. We've got to go through all of them. It is a terribly inefficient system. The Office of Personnel Management put out a report a couple of years ago, and it said the optimum process under Title V of the United States Code is an 80-day, 14-step process. Now, if I was the Chico for a private company and I went to the board of directors and said, hey, guess what? I just designed a 14-step, 80-day process for hiring people, I'd be fired. And yet OPM says that's the optimal system under Title V. And that is one of the reasons why Congress and OSD has moved towards let's use the accepted service. It is easier to hire people, it's easier to pay people, it's easier to fire people. Now, I know Ron's been on both systems. He has told me that the grass isn't always greener on the Title X side. But if we do it right, we can do it faster. The problem on Title V also is there are 3 buckets of time. The first bucket is the time it spends with the personnelists. The second bucket is the time it spends with the command. And the third bucket is the onboarding process to include security clearances. One of the things we try to do is we try to write bijou position descriptions, right? Individual ones, everyone's a little bit different. And it goes back and forth between the personnelists and the command to get the words right. Again, what industry does is they use a standard position description. There's no argument, that's what we hire against. Same thing with the job announcements. We use standard job announcements. We could use open continuous hiring process. There are things under Title V we can do better. As a matter of fact, the Army Inspector General has been so frustrated with hiring people in his own shop that he has started an inspection of the civilian hiring process, and I'm assuming Dave Quantock's going to have some really good advice for me on how to do it better. It stinks. It's got to be better. There's no real excuse to say, well, it's just the way it is. We've got to find a way to do it better under the existing system, and then as we go to this accepted service under Title X for the cyber warfare people, we've got to find a way to get the right people more quickly so we can move out faster. Because, you know, as Ron will tell you, we're at war right now, and we got to have the people right now.
For civilian equivalent of our Branch 17, our cyberspace effects, our high-end operators. I've come convinced that accepted service is the right way to go with that. And here's a key piece. Rank in person, not rank in position. In the competitive service, all the work is done up front in the position description and classification, in my view, to get the least common denominator and lower the risk about what you're hiring, and then what you hire is what you have. In this space, the technology and the threat is evolving so well, and you really want to get the talent, you have to be able to incentivize and reward that talent. And part of this idea of rank in person, when you have an interactive on-net operator that has gone from apprentice to journeyman to master, you want to be able to adequately compensate that you're competitive. Again, provide that environment that they really thrive in the environment, what the job they're doing, but you got to be competitive. When you got a master exploit analyst or a master ION, which we have very few of, you want to be able to compensate those small number of people well, and you can do that by essentially you promote them in place by compensation, right? And so I'm convinced on our high-end operators, that is the way we need to go.
And NSA, I mean, they do that with their linguists, they do that with their principal technologists, and so you can have a linguist who sits at that workstation every day. He may not manage anyone else, and he can go from entry level to a 15 in a very reasonable amount of time.
And again, I think the point that both Mr. Pontius and General Fogarty have made is it's not for everybody in the IT system. Not everybody who's an IT specialist is going to be in the accepted service. It's only going to be those high-end people that we really need to identify to be able to take advantage of exactly what they describe.
Okay, the next question is for Mr. Pontius, and then a follow-up with General Fogarty. So you are getting ready to move our Cyber Second Army from Fort Belvoir to Fort Gordon. You are operating 24/7. The enemy's firing at you every day. And many of us still have scar tissue from BRAC on what personnel move and who moves and who doesn't. And so what are your thoughts on successfully transitioning the headquarters and more importantly, the talented workforce from Belvoir to Gordon, and then to follow General Fogarty, what are your challenges in accepting the command?
So this is actually a conversation topic that Mr. Snyder and I have had many conversations about. Because what you got to keep in mind of, our move is a stationing decision, not a BRAC decision. So guess what? None of the BRAC incentive and entitlements and management and all things, none of those things are there up front. And so part of what we're working through is we're working through building the campaign plan about what we call the road to Gordon, of what it really means to transition an operational headquarters from one location to another. Assuming, and we're well on track with our construction, if it's out for bid right now, contracts are supposed to be let by the end of August, ground is supposed to be broken by November. Assuming that stays on track, we are expecting to move in FY20. And you say, why so long? It's a 2-year construction, a year IT fit out, because that is our war-fighting headquarters. That's the way you have to look at it. And then about a year to certify and accredit, given that we're building a wing on NSA Georgia to be hand in hand with the intelligence community as we work, again, defensive, offensive, cyber, and DODN operations. So we're working our way through that. We're being greatly, I think, received by the Augusta community, the state of Georgia. There's things General Fogarty is working, because he is in many ways working his way through the challenges of evolving, expanding from a signal network based workforce to really be what's this larger cyberspace operations piece that he's leading the ground. But we also have a cyber protection brigade, and one of the battalions of our offensive brigade is also at Fort Gordon. So we're experiencing the hiring challenges in workforce and working our way through that. Part of what we'll do with the Army is identify what are those entitlements and incentives we need to support our move. The Army is standing by. We'll be working that in Palm 19 is the right time frame as we work through. But part of this, and it's what Anthony talked about, it's about not waiting for somebody to show up. In this space, you've got to actively work to grow the workforce. You got to work the interns. You got to get involved early in undergraduate training. You've got to get involved in high schools, and that's what we're starting to really work. It takes time and attention to do it, and we're starting to work our way through that.
So this is what keeps me up at night. So if you think about between 2007 and 2015, DoD invested almost $2 billion in infrastructure at Fort Gordon. Now, the majority of that, almost $1 billion, was in NSA, Georgia, but there have been other activities. Now, I include within that number the headquarters for Army Cyber. If you look at from today until 2025, it'll be another $1.5 billion to $2 billion that DoD will invest in the infrastructure. There's no BRAC authorities, so I manage that because it is truly a coalition of willing. Army Cyber runs their project. NSA, which is getting ready to get through another expansion down there, runs their project. I have almost a $900 million project of my own for the Cyber Center of Excellence. The other services are making investments there. And as a senior mission commander, I've got to make sure that the infrastructure actually supports all of that, that the timing is such that his trucks aren't being delayed because my trucks are driving up with construction materials, et cetera. So that post is undergoing significant transformation. We'll actually, on 30 August, we're going to sit down with TRADOC, because it is a TRADOC installation, and basically herd all the cats to make sure we understand have complete visibility on what everyone's doing down to the nth level of detail. Now, if you think about 10 years ago, about 75% of the activity at Fort Gordon was training, principally signal training. Fast forward to today, only 25% of the activity is actual training. Again, still the majority of it's signal training. It'll grow into the cyber and electronic warfare. About 75% is actual 24/7 cyber, intel, signal operations. So that changes the character of the installations. If you're running 24/7 operations, your medical support looks very different. Your physical security with these national treasures, frankly, which is what we have down there, hiding in plain sight today, it changes the nature. So this is kind of the complex environment that's happening down there. Now, the good news is we've had a small taste of that as NSA Georgia built out, and I was there as the commander of NSA Georgia when we designed and started building the new campus, and we recruited about the first 300 NSA civilians to bring down there. So at a micro level, that's what happened. And what we found was you had to make sure people understood the operational nature of the jobs. That's what will attract them initially. You got to make sure that they understand what the local environment is. And we have some really good anecdotes about misperceptions on that. And what we found is with those first 300 hires, about 85–90% stayed for the first 5 years, which is probably pretty good. And so it was laying out what the environment was going to be, laying out what the opportunities were going to be, so that we didn't miss expectations. And I think you have to be just very, very clear in your communications. If you overpromise, underdeliver, word will get out very, very quickly, and you're going to have these gorgeous facilities that will lack the most important ingredient, and that's the human being. And so you got to be honest. You have to be brutally honest. But the good news is the people that are willing to make the move often are the adventurous. They're the ones that are in love with the mission. and frankly, they're willing to do what it takes. But we just have to clearly communicate that.
And if you haven't been on Fort Gordon lately, you'd be really surprised when you walk around, drive around, the number of sailors, airmen, and Marines you also see on the post now. It's absolutely a joint environment down there now, operationally.
Thank you, Ron. That was a question we did not get to. But in our last 6 minutes, we'll start with Chris, and if you'll give us your 1-minute elevator closing comments, we would appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, just much thanks. And typically you get in these venues and we get the question from the private sector, and based on location, academia, how can you help? I would share with that, I think there's 3 things. One of those is help provide data or research-driven solutions on how we can train our people better. Teach us not to be afraid to fail. That's not a real popular thing in the Army, and probably not the other services. But I know in the private sector, quite often you rush to failure because you know if you fail quickly, then you can get on to the next success. So I ask you to continue to help us with that. And the last thing I just ask is that even when we don't agree, help us continue the dialogue, because we're not always going to agree. And this dialogue is important between the private sector and academia. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Anthony?
All right, thank you. Thank you for having us. A couple of things. One is I would encourage us to imagine the future relative to network infrastructure that supports this nation's warfighters with no reference to its current state. That's hard, very hard to do, but that's what our adversaries are doing. And I would make sure that you have talent on our teams imagining just that. Apple recently went out and plucked a 20-year-old kid at a Cal Berkeley and gave him Twitter and told him to revolutionize their service for iPhones using Twitter. And he did, and he makes a lot of money. And it's just I only reference that is it's just a different way to think. So I just would encourage that. There was reference to the Manhattan Project. We talked about putting people on the moon and Star Wars and the amazing work that these leaders have provided to our nation's warfighters. The work that has been done by our government is amazing. And I do believe we have to together take on this cyber challenge. And it's going to take acquisition reform is not going to happen fast enough. And so it's going to take leadership and courage and people who will drive a change agenda. The networking challenge gets bigger tomorrow, right? Like right now. So 50 billion devices on the Internet of Things is 3 years away. I would encourage us as an industrial base to figure out how to leverage the $500 billion that's been invested in network infrastructure by American-based companies over the last decade to figure out how we bring that to our nation's warfighters faster. And then I think there's magic in the area or spirit of partnership.
Thank you. General Fogarty.
General Perkins asked me about a year ago if my greatest challenges were technology or policy. I said, sir, we have challenges in each of those, but none of those are insurmountable. So our biggest challenge right now is culture. And so what I would ask everyone to do is understand that effective collaboration is the key to success. And that's between not only Intel, Signal, EW, et cetera, it's between our commercial partners, those that are out in academia, and very, very importantly, our multinational partners. So if we can get over that cultural leap with security clearances, ways of doing business, et cetera, we can accelerate to get to where we want to be much, much faster.
As we'll make 2 points, I really want to just highlight while the Army's been under tremendous pressure the last few years on force structure and total resources, the Army absolutely has made cyber a priority, and we are getting the support and resources we need to grow. We're being very judicious not to ask for anything more than we absolutely need, but the Army is also figuring out how do we tailor the processes that we can rapidly acquire capabilities. How do we tailor the things we need to do on the workforce? Again, it's not a huge number of folks on the high-end cyber operators, military and civilian, but the Army is leading in this space in many ways because of the support from the Army. The other point I want to make, I want to expand my comment about the DODN is our operational environment, networks, data, and systems. The other thing the leadership of not only the Army but the DoD is starting to think through is really about mission assurance. building upon Anthony's comments. We have been, our technological advantage in what we do and the pace of our knowledge about our situation, our war fight, being able to make decisions is unparalleled. But we cannot today, you cannot trust the system will be there, you can trust the system. We have to fundamentally evolve to really be about a mission assurance. Part of this is that culture thing General Fogarty talked about, but that really is where we've got to go in the conversation this couple of years. Got to balance mission functionality has always overrode the previous cybersecurity. You got to bring that back into balance. There's no more additional resources. What are the right investments we should be making? Mission assurance will be a big discussion over the next couple of years.
So I would close with saying, number one, the Defense Department is really thinking about what we have to do in terms of people in the future. There is an initiative underway. It's called Force of the Future that was started about 18 months ago. There are some discrete things that are being done right now. I will say that's just the start of the journey. And I see General Keith Walker here. He and I worked for a long time on the Army Human Dimension effort and the work that TRADOC is doing right now. And Keith, I want to say thanks for the partnership and the work you did, because it's starting to play out right now. But to pick up on what Anthony said is we need to be able to imagine a future we can't see. And the human dimension is the essential part of that. We need people who can think differently, who can help us through this time of transition in a world that we really can't see very clearly yet, but we know is out there. So I appreciate AUSA for giving us the opportunity to talk about just this subject. So thank you very much. Susan.
Yes, thank you to our distinguished panel. General Swan, over to you.